Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I'm back with another Game of Thrones video because we have a brand new full series order for the Game of Thrones spin-off series based on the Targaryen house. And this news dropped at perfect time because there's a lot of news surrounding Game of Thrones in general. First of all, Dan and Dave, the producers of the Game of Thrones show, basically shoved their foot in their mouths saying that they had no idea what they were doing in making Game of Thrones Season 8. They said in an interview that they had no long-term agenda on character arcs, themes, or prophecies. So that explains why Season 8 came out of absolutely nowhere. And we got other news that the show called BloodMoon that was supposed to focus on the first Long Night has been scrapped and cancelled. And with this cancelling, I'm not too surprised. I don't think there's going to be a lot of buzz around the Long Night and the Night King since Dan and Dave have ruined his character. The Night King was defeated in 3 episodes with no issues, with no prophecy backing it. All the spirals, all the symbols that he used, all the babies that he converted really led to nothing. So I think it is kind of a waste of time to go back and explore the first time the Night King came south, because the Game of Thrones show that preceded it basically butchered the character. And it makes even more sense now that they're cancelling BloodMoon because of this brand new show called The House of the Dragon. And at face value, covering the Targaryen house makes more sense, since they have such a deep history. And we spent the last part of the show rooting for Jon and Daenerys, both Targaryens. And since it's going to focus on Targaryen history, we have a lot more opportunity to explore in-depth character development, politics, which is what the TV show of Game of Thrones bases itself on, political intrigue, but still have the fantastical elements like dragons. But the new series House of the Dragon has a full series order, and we're going to be getting 10 episodes in Season 1. And what makes this news fantastic is they're bringing everyone on board. George R.R. Martin is a writer and producer, and to make things better, Miguel Sapochnik will be a co-showrunner, and he'll be directing the pilot of the season. And I don't think people understand how big this news is. Miguel Sapochnik made his director debut in Hardhome, one of the best Game of Thrones episodes to date. And then after Hardhome, he was hired again to direct Battle of the Bastards, and then Winds of Winter. And in my mind, these 3 episodes are the top 3 episodes in all of Game of Thrones. And then Miguel Sapochnik came back for Season 8 and he directed The Long Night and The Bells. So Miguel Sapochnik has an incredible track record. And based on talent alone, this show is lined up to be incredible. Unlike Game of Thrones where we were disappointed because the producers of the show weren't paying attention to plot threads, and they were responsible for finishing a story that they didn't necessarily understand, we now have George R.R. Martin and a great director at the helm of this show where the story is already complete. Targaryen history has already been written by George R.R. Martin in his novel series Fire and Blood. And this book series spawns 300 years of Targaryen history. We get Aegon's conquest, where Aegon takes over Westeros. And it goes all the way to the civil war of the Targaryen house. And based on the news, that's what this show is going to focus on. It's going to focus on the events of the Dance of Dragons. And they say that this show will lead up to the result and to the end of this civil war. And for those of you who don't know what this is, the Dance of Dragons basically crippled the Targaryen house. And the Targaryen king at the time had a daughter with one woman and then had a son with another. And his son was heir to the throne, but before he died, he said that his daughter should be the one to be queen. This resulted in a massive civil war between 2 separate Targaryen houses. And to sum it up, it resulted in many potential Targaryen heirs dying, most of the Targaryen children dying, and also the death of many dragons. And it basically jump-started dragons starting to become small like dogs that we see in the Dragon Pit in Game of Thrones. So I think this is incredible news, but the real question is, what is this series going to focus on? And there's multiple possibilities. In terms of Targaryen history, there is so much to dive into. And if you look at the Targaryen name, it's fascinating and very ironic. It started with Aegon, who decided he wanted to take over Westeros. And then if you follow his bloodline, it's going to end with Jon Snow, who we now know is north of the Wall. But based on this news, it tells us a couple different things. First of all, the show is called The House of the Dragon, which based on the title, we can say that it's not necessarily focusing on one individual character or a concept. It's focusing strictly on the Targaryen name. And the fact that the show is getting its plot from a book that covers 300 years of history could suggest that this show will be very different. We're not just going to follow one character through their whole journey, we're going to follow a generational story. We could follow Aegon's conquest, where he takes over the 7 kingdoms, and then we could jump next season to the Targaryen Civil War. Or this show could be held in the timeline during the Civil War, where we see Targaryens slowly start to lose everything. But much like in Game of Thrones when they flash back to the Tower of Joy, when they flash back to Robert's Rebellion, this show very much might run back to look at Aegon's conquest and see how the Targaryen name was started while their house is being destroyed. But I personally have an idea for this spinoff that I would absolutely love to see. But usually what I love to see never ends up happening. But anyways, I would absolutely love if this show segmented itself to different points in history to show all of Targaryens. Because the show is called A House of Targaryen. But I love the idea that every new timeline that we're in, we focus on the next Aegon Targaryen. Because there's an Aegon Targaryen for every main point in history. It starts with Aegon I and his conquest. He was from Valyria in Essos, but it was destroyed, so he settled on Dragonstone. He really wanted to rule over Westeros, so he ended up taking it over. And we see a lot of key points in history in this time. We see Harrenhal get destroyed. We see the Baratheons come into power owning Storm's End during a battle called the Last Storm. We see Loren Lannister and Meryn Gardner. They grab their huge army to fight Aegon and his two sisters. But then this iconic moment happens called the Field of Fire, where they burn them all. House Lannister survives and surrenders, while House Gardner is destroyed and replaced by the Tyrells. We see Torrhen Stark bend the knee and become the king who knelt. And we also see Aegon become king, that he took over, called Aegon Fort, ended up growing to become King's Landing. But then after that generation of the conquest of the Targaryens, we then go to Dance of Dragons, and it's a civil war amongst the family. And the death of the Targaryen king basically results in the battle between Aegon II and Rhaenyra. Both of these people die, and Rhaenys child, Aegon III, ends up taking the throne in the end. And then there's Aegon IV, and he was considered one of the absolute worst Targaryen kings. He had numerous bastards, but just before he died, he legitimized all of them. And the fact that he did that led to many Blackfyre rebellions. And Aegon IV actually birthed Brynden Rivers, who became the Three-Eyed Raven that we meet in Game of Thrones. And then there's also Aegon V, and he's been written about a ton. And it's the story of Dunk and Egg. Egg met Dunk and became a squire. Egg is the brother of Maester Aemon, and Egg eventually becomes the king of Westeros. But after that, what makes me the most excited, more than anything, is that this is all a prequel, but I would love if this series converted from a prequel to a sequel, because there's only one more Aegon, and that's Aegon VI, and that's Jon Snow. I would love to jump forward in time and see Jon Snow lay down his own legacy and create a new line of Targaryens that aren't about fire and blood, but are founded on the morals of House Stark. And maybe we'll get to see House Targaryen live on through the House of Snow. I would love to be able to see Jon be elected and become the king beyond the wall and build a giant force. And if you look at the world as a whole, this could have a lot of historical ramifications in the future. Let's say 500, 1,000 years pass from Jon Snow and his rule north of the wall. Then we can have a big civilized society north of the wall. Maybe freedom fighters. That's another threat to the kingdom of Westeros. But I would love that aspect of the story to come. And as a family, we can see House Targaryen's complete character arc. It starts with Aegon Targaryen, and then that leads to the Targaryens being the strongest house. But then that leads to Civil War, the Dance of Dragons, where they turn into basically nothing. But then the show ends with Jon Snow, where he gets to rebuild, reevaluate, and change that bloodline forever. But those are my thoughts about this show and this spin-off. My predictions are a little far-fetched, but I would love for them to happen. Please let me know what you think. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.